Here you can see me mixing up the epoxy resin. There are two parts to it, and you mix it up 2-to-1 with the activator, which is the darker of the two, being the smaller part. You have to make sure you mix it very well. I've added a bit of white pigment, and basically once you get a consistent colour, you know that it's thoroughly mixed. I'm applying the epoxy to my border using a brush, and I'm rubbing it into the back of the scrim, pushing it through onto the tile. Now, the first time I did one of these borders, I used a palette knife, and it was quicker, and although I wasn't putting very much more of the epoxy on, too much was pushing through so that it went all the way through between the tiles and poked out on the front side. So I had to spend quite a lot of time grinding that back the next day after it had set. And that's because these tiles are really very slim. They're only about 1.5 mm thick. So to get better control with my application, I'm now using a brush. And this did actually prove very effective, but it was a bit more time consuming. And it did make my glue go further, and as this glue is quite expensive, that's not a bad thing either. This is a slow setting epoxy resin, which means the working time is about 2 hours, and it sets in about 24 hours, with full strength being reached after about 5 to 7 days, depending on the ambient temperature. Now, the great advantage to a slow set over a rapid set is not just the working time. With a rapid set, you've got about 20 minutes. The trouble with epoxy is the fumes are horrendous, and they cause quite a strong allergic reaction in me. So if I use a rapid set, the chemical reaction begins quite quickly, and that's where I get the worst effects. That's where I feel the worst effects. So if I'm using a slow set, there's no chemical reaction happening for a couple of hours, which means I can be in close proximity without worrying as much about how I'm going to be affected. Now, some people find that they have an effect on their lungs, and for me, it's an effect on my skin. I get dermatitis, and that's just from the fumes. If it even touches my skin, I get a very, very bad swelling. So I avoid using epoxy resin if I possibly can. But my advice would be to use, where possible, a slow set, and thereby avoid exposing yourself to the toxic fumes. You'll probably find initially you don't react, but the more you use this kind of product, the more likely you are to develop a reaction.
this was glued on Friday and it's now Monday. It would have been probably fine to move the day after it was glued, but because I'm so allergic to it, I wanted to give it more time to actually set before I went near it. So I'm going to flip it over because this is the back that was glued, and then peel the masking tape off the front, and we should see what sort of a finish we get. Right, so I'm quite pleased with this. There are occasional places where the glue has pushed forward to the front, and I can grind this off with my Dremel. But actually, mostly, I've got nice deep grout joints that I can fill. I did dye the epoxy resin white, but because epoxy resin starts off as sort of honey coloured, you never get a true white. But you now can see the finished effect, and I hope you'll agree it's very nice. I'm very happy with it. So I'm really pleased with that, and we'll move on to the sticking stage of the project.